All right, so I thought we might start with you.
Yeah.
And one of the questions we've been opening with is like, why do you compete in HYROX? And I know you do HYROX, I know you do CrossFit, so what's your reason?
I just think I've always moved. Like ever since I was little, I've always moved. And like as I've grown up through the school system, there was school sports, university sport. And then when I left university, I found myself like not moving. And that's how I eventually ended up finding CrossFit. I ended up in a CrossFit gym. Little known to me at the time what CrossFit was. And that put me on the path of like movement, just everyday movement. I am not overly competitive. I mean, I am overly competitive. But in terms of my fitness, I do it because it makes me feel great. It's provided me with a community. And now it's provided me with this most incredible career. And it's all based around movement and fitness. And HYROX has just kind of become a part of that. Like we go and we broadcast. And what do we do after we broadcast, Greg? We go for a run.
Yeah.
We go and we try and do an open HYROX or a doubles or a relay, and it's just all part of like life now.
Yeah, I think I've heard you say you train literally every day, don't you?
Yeah, give or take. I take rest days, not when it's programmed, but when I feel like crap. And I'm like, my body's telling me something, and that is not to train today. But like, it's not heavy volume every day. Sometimes it might be a cycle ride. Like I've just come back from holiday and I have moved every day, whether that be like a 10-mile hike or a cycle down White Rim in Utah canyons, or like, it doesn't necessarily need to be in a gym, does it? It's just training, movement, doing stuff.
All right, so in terms of your work, you like people listening to this will know you as presenter for the HYROX live streams on the majors. How did you get into that? What's the background there?
Didn't know I wanted to be a presenter. When I left university, my ultimate goal, and this is so niche, was to be a researcher in rugby union.
Wow.
So for those who don't know, in the television world, a researcher is basically like the first rung. You go runner, where you go around making teas and coffees, and then you become a researcher and you get to do all the background research for the people who are on television for the various things. And I'd been doing an internship with the Cardiff Blues rugby team at the time, so I was in rugby union. And that was also how I found CrossFit, because it was one of our former rugby players who had left and opened up a CrossFit gym. Mm-hmm. But long story short, once I then made that happen and I got my job at BT Sport Rugby and I was working as a junior AP and shooting features and producing things, I started going up the ranks, and you begin to realise, as you do with any job, what you actually really enjoy doing. And the answer was I really enjoyed interacting with people. And that could be producing, and obviously there's a creative side to it as well, which I still have like a big part of me, like setting the shots up nice. Mm-hmm. I like to do a bit of like photography on the side, anything that's composition wise I really enjoy. But I realized that on this track that I was on in producing, it took you further and further away from people. You ended up in a truck writing running orders, doing admin, unless you wanted to go into like team management at the top end. So I was like, okay, so where do I go from here? And I pretty much only had one option, and that was to step in front of the camera and start reporting. And then you do it. And I don't know whether you felt this when we did our first ever one together in Manchester at World Champs 2 years ago. But the buzz and the high of live television, like that's hard to replicate. Yeah. And you end up just like almost chasing it, those kind of adrenaline hits. And I think you see it with extreme sports athletes and HYROX athletes, you know, when they've overexceeded expectations and this big, very stressful thing has gone really well, the feeling's insane. I think eventually, yes, it's obviously a job, but it becomes just like a passion, and it's something that I really like every time we go live, like it's a privilege, it's great. Like it's really hard to find the words for it. Like it's almost like you achieve this huge goal, but it's every single time you've gone live on television.
Yeah. It's a buzz. It's
a real buzz.
There's like build up to it, and then a bit of a come down afterwards.
Oh,
as well, right?
Hugely. Yeah. And the stress. Oh my God, the stress. And it does get a little bit easier every single time. Like the first one we did was so stressful. Yeah. But yeah, it's just, you know, it's really cool to be a part of, isn't it?
Do you feel a pressure?
Always. What is it that the athletes say? Pressure is a privilege.
Privilege, yeah.
I think the same goes for television.
Do you have a way of coping with that? Like, if people listening to this feel the pressure racing in HYROX, is there anything that you've got that maybe translates towards that?
Two things. I think not overthinking it is, I know it's so easy to say as opposed to do, But the more you get into your own head about stuff, the less you are able to actually truly understand a situation and react to it. So it's very easy when we go into TV presenting, people say you need to find your own voice and be comfortable being yourself on camera. But actually doing that in a high pressure environment is really hard. So I guess techniques I've used in the past involve, the more I do my background research, which obviously doesn't really, it applies to athletes in the way the more that you train, the more confidence I have in myself when we're doing something. So most people won't know that before we go live in HYROX, this isn't just things that have just suddenly appeared in my, I mean, sometimes it is, but just ideas that suddenly appeared in my head. I spent a very, very long time talking to all of the athletes, getting background research, going through things with you. We've maybe rehearsed it a couple of times, like vocally. You know, and the more prepared I am, the much more easier it is when that little red light goes on the camera and we're in it. Going back to not getting overwhelmed by situations, the more that you treat it like it's just a conversation between us two. And then you guys over there are just kind of part of this. So you chat to camera a bit, like you're chatting to your other friend, you chat to you a bit. And the more conversational I find, the more relaxed it is. And then when things go wrong, you can, you know, especially with what we're doing and the audiences that we have, things have gone wrong. Oh, well, it happens, you know, and we can roll with it a bit more. This is not prime time BBC television, which, let's be honest, would be a whole heap more stressful.
Yeah. Going back to that first point you're saying about doing the prep, and that's come up a few times on here, like for confidence. There's nothing like knowing that you've done the work and done the training and done everything for feeling confident when you stand on the start line.
If you use 2% of what you actually prepped, then that's a solid broadcast. I think, like, you don't need to use everything you've learned, but guess what, it might help you down the line, and it's almost the confidence it gives in yourself. I assume exactly the same can be said for training. Well, I say assume. I know that exactly the same. When I go into a competition having not trained, sometimes it's nice because the pressure's off, you know, you've not got any expectation. But if you trained, the expectation is there, but you know you've put the work in. So the results will come.
I do often think with you, to be fair, like I do it for HYROX, and like I know HYROX inside out, and so like I've got that level of comfort doing it. But I always think for you, like, oh my God, like she's doing CrossFit one weekend, and then she's doing rugby the next weekend, and then this HYROX. And like, you have to really know a lot of sports as well to be able to do it.
And there's a skill in that as well. And kind of one of the kind of things I lived by was very much, don't say anything you don't know, because that's what's going to get you into trouble. If you start like guesstimating or trying to sound like you know more than you do. Quite often my role is not to know everything. It's just to know the right questions to ask to someone who does know everything. To be able to share that knowledge. And I think as long as you kind of can bring that into every job. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've now worked in industries that I've worked enough in to be pretty relaxed in what we're talking about. Like, I mean, I now follow HYROX every 365 days of the year. That first one in Manchester, that was all learnt because I'd walked in pretty much fresh with about a week's worth of background research. But the confidence came from me having spoken to every single Elite 15 athlete in the build-up and knowing their personal journeys and stories, and I could like lean back and rely on that information. Plus having you and HYROX obviously was a really good kind of balance of knowledge.
Away from presenting, you've also own a gym.
Yep, and the amount I'm away from home means that a huge part of that is actually down to my husband, bless him, who also has a full-time job. But it's just grounding, right? It's a community of people. It makes where I live feel like a home because I'm not from that part of the world. And I get to coach and be in an environment that I really enjoy being in. And I'm sure, well, I don't know if you're the same, but I like to be busy all the time. It's kind of been like a trope that's followed me my entire life. Every single second of the day is filled. I'm like late for every single meeting, as you found out today. And if I'm not busy, then actually that has quite an impact on my mental health. And presenting is a job where you can have really big periods of time where you're flat out, and really long periods of time, or you know, even if it's a week, it feels long, where you've got nothing. So the gym for me fills those gaps, gives me something that I can completely engage in and give everything to in the periods that I'm not getting work in what I consider my real job. So yeah, it's honestly, it's amazing. I love our community.
What is it you love about the community, the CrossFit community, the HYROX community, your gym community? What is it you love most about those things?
I think there's a sense of everyone having similar values and ideals. Like we might have different religions, skin colours, grown up in different places, different classes, but actually we all know that we do hard things and we kind of push ourselves to personal limits and achieve goals, and like everyone has similar mindsets in that regard. Like we work, you know, people are willing to work, and on top of that, in a slightly more surface level, because of that, the people you interact with, we're all kind of very, very similar. And the conversations and the people are wonderful. I mean, obviously it goes deeper with the people that I have in my affiliate because I know them so well, but we can rock up. I always think, I go back to Copenhagen a lot. I rocked up to Copenhagen and it wasn't with broadcast, so we weren't with our usual little hub, but immediately felt right at home because there was so many athletes that I kind of knew a little bit or enough to chat in the lobby, and the team around us, suddenly it's like, oh yeah, no, we're just a HYROX gang, you know? We're all friends and we're all...
It's like you're surrounded by your people.
Your people. I know you must feel exactly the same.
Oh yeah, completely. And even if you don't really know them, you know you could go and speak to someone and...
Just start chatting.
You'll have something in common, yeah. Is there anything that you think HYROX can learn from CrossFit or CrossFit can learn from HYROX, or...?
I actually honestly think, and I think the same goes for a lot of different sports, that the communities and the things that are created at a very basic level are quite similar. So especially when we're in these niche sports, kind of feels like it's our own, I'm not going to say secret club, but you know, we're fighting with the likes of football and rugby and cricket and these big major sports, and we've got our own little secret really cool thing happening. And I think that bonds people, but also makes us very protective over what we have, which manifests itself in loads of different ways. So I think there's a lot of similarities between all the sports, or at least the more niche sports that I do, in that regard. If we're talking about things that they can learn from one another, obviously CrossFit's 15 years ahead of HYROX, 10 years ahead of HYROX. So they've already marked out a path that has been very successful in something that HYROX wants to achieve. Although ultimately I still stand by and believe that they're really quite different sports and attribute I think their kind of forward progress is going to look very different from one another. But especially, for example, CrossFit's content strategy in the early days, I think will be a really good base for HYROX to pull from in terms of being a hub for content, and especially when you're trying to build heroes, because heroes are what sells sport, and we have got 30 of them. That arguably rotates a little bit, so should we say 60 of them? But you've got them like there and ready to go, and you're kicking off careers of people, and HYROX can be this huge thing, not just from a professional standpoint, but for these people's personal lives. And through content, I think CrossFit's got a great roadmap as to how they can help those people and build the sport at the same time. If we're flipping the script, obviously HYROX has created an incredible platform for mass participation, which I don't think CrossFit have quite done yet. I'm not sure that CrossFit want to. And their mass participation is the open. It's people coming into affiliates as opposed to international big events. And they found something truly unbelievably special there that I don't think HYROX can necessarily replicate. You know, it's almost something that's quite special and independent about the two sports.
Do you have a feeling for how big you think HYROX can become?
I mean, it's on its way, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's feeling pretty big right now.
The numbers I hear seem to increase every week almost.
I mean, what I would say is the next step will be a legitimate, being taken seriously by, in our world, TV broadcasters. So someone like the BBC going, I want to put it on my platform. Someone like Eurosport going, oh, no, I'm going to buy into this so we can show it, because that's the kind of numbers you're generating. So CrossFit's there with ESPN. I think they get primetime slots whenever the CrossFit Games is on. Like, that will be HYROX's next big thing in the area that I know. I mean, obviously, there'll be other areas to measure success, right? Whether that's participation, whether that's getting certain venues. You know, there's lots of different measures of success, but that'd be the one that I'm most familiar with.
Okay. We'll talk about the elite of the sport in a minute, but let's talk about your elite performances in HYROX.
I think elite is like the most loosest term that you've ever, loosest context you've ever used that term. My elite experiences involve, I think I'm operating around a 132 in the open.
That's nice.
I've raced open 2 or 3 times. and I've raced relay. This year I'm going to do doubles, and my intent is to get about 4 to 6 races in across the year.
Okay.
That's my plan. But I'm not as fit as I'd wanted to be because I've just come back from 3 weeks in America. But I've started a running program. So that's being done by one of my affiliate members who is an endurance runner, and he himself at the age of 60 has just found HYROX and is loving it.
Awesome.
So we do have a little crew in our gym who are really into it. So he's doing my running program, which I'm trying to stick to as best as I possibly can. And then I'm continuing with my usual training in the gym. And probably with a slightly more HYROX specific emphasis than before in terms of just the implements used. My problem is I love Olympic weightlifting, like love it. So it's always going to be a hard sell to be like, Lauren, go for a run, or you could do this barbell workout. And I really don't like running.
Have you found your doubles partner yet, or are you on the lookout for that?
I mean, basically, my husband tells me that he won't run with me until my running gets better. Okay. So I'm on the lookout if anyone wants a bang average runner, but will be really good with that sled. Come at me. All right. No, I'll find someone throughout the year. The likelihood is maybe some of the Rox Queens girls will take pity on me and come for a run.
I wanted to ask, like, you've been around a lot of sports and the elite of HYROX. Are there any common traits that you've seen in those top level athletes that maybe you've noticed from sport to sport or anything?
Yeah, it's a complete drive to be the best you can be in one thing. It's maybe almost where my career is slightly disheveled because I do so many, jack of all trades kind of vibe. But the people who give 110% of their life into this one thing, they're going to be successful at it, like within like certain boundaries. And you can see it in HYROX, like more and more with the athletes who are becoming more and more professionalized. They've started to like leave their jobs and be able to focus full time on being an athlete. Megan Jacoby is the perfect example. And in doing so, we're just getting better and better and better and better. And the sport's at a stage where it's now allowing athletes to be able to do that. I mean, the ones who did well originally were the ones who had a good cardiovascular background, who maybe do Ironman or triathlon, or to an extent, maybe the more running orientated CrossFitters. But now the ones that would do well are HYROXers. But that's across the, you want to be a downhill biker. The best downhill bikers are going to be the ones that dedicate their time to it, because it is going to decrease your kind of emphasis on the nerves when you're going down something really steep. You won't have that same fear factor. You're going to be better at reading the lines in front of you. You're going to be more reactive. And that's, I mean, is it Malcolm Gladwell, the 1,000 hours?
10,000 hour.
Yeah, I thoroughly believe in that principle. So the more that you dedicate your entire life to one thing, the better you're going to be. And you do see that. It's very rare you get someone who just waltzes in and is just suddenly naturally exceptionally good at it. There has got to be a background that's lent itself to that. Especially now the standards improving, it's harder to walk in and do that. Yeah, really interestingly, another of my wild and wonderful sports is cliff diving. Which I do the highlights every round for Red Bull TV. And we've recently had an athlete come in the cliff diving world, and her background is diving, but for Cirque du Soleil.
Oh, wow.
And guess what? That translates really well. So all of her Cirque du Soleil stuff is translated to the high board, the 20-meter platform, 21-meter platform in cliff diving, which is very cool. And she's doing really well. Wow,
amazing. Saying about specialisation, but is there anyone outside of the world of HYROX at the moment that you'd love to see come in and you think would do well?
Oh, only just from a personal perspective. Like for me, seeing people like Kieran Riley come and do HYROX really blows my mind, because for all intents and purposes, like freestyle BMX doesn't necessarily translate to HYROX. Like I work in BMX, I know a lot of BMXers, and they like their beer and they're a bit loose and they got screw loose, they do insane tricks and exceptionally talented, but you don't go, oh, should we run? And should we do ski erg? And should we? Yeah. They're very explosive athletes, but I wouldn't necessarily say explosive lends itself to this kind of sport. So that's really interesting. We're about to see Adam Blythe, who is a former track cyclist turned Eurosport cycling lead pundit. He's going to be running in Birmingham. I saw on Instagram the other day, so that's really cool. Obviously, seeing the CrossFit athletes is always entertaining for me because I've got a direct comparison. I see them on the CrossFit floor, and it's great to see them run in HYROX. I'm not even going to name names. I know when you spoke to John Singleton, he mentioned someone like Tia Claire to me, who is just you can't even find the words to describe how talented this woman is at fitness. And I think so much of it, yes, she's exceptionally fit, but a huge amount of it is just mental. And if we're talking about athletes who dedicate their entire life to doing something, like she's very much on that kind of, has that capacity. So yes, I would love to see her do one, because I think she would actually do really well. But it's just, the cross-sport comparisons are great.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say that they're going to waltz in and do the Elite 15, because I think now that's becoming more and more specialised. But seeing where they land is very interesting.
Yeah. I should say for people listening, Kieran Riley has been on the podcast recently, and I think he's doing Birmingham as well.
Is he?
Yeah. And I think he said to me he's hoping for around an hour.
That's sick.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Amazing. We're recording this just over a week before the first major in Amsterdam. I'm not sure when this episode gets released yet, but let's talk about the upcoming season, who we're excited about seeing. Before we get into it, we should probably just explain the elite setup for the season.
Oh yes.
What the majors are, how to qualify for those, and so on. Do you wanna try it out, or should I?
Shall I try to remember that? So you've got pre-qualified. Let's start with the qualification for the majors series. How are we choosing our Elite 15? So you've got the athletes who have pre-qualified from last year. And that is your podium from Worlds.
Yes.
And then the winner from every single major that we had last year.
Yeah.
So that is a maximum of 7. In the women's, it's 5.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Next week's going to go so well. And then the remainder of the field is going to be made up of your 2 best times in the last 365 days.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
A combination of those two, the average. And if you go onto the HYROX website, then you can see a nice list of this. Now, obviously, we have our Elite 15, and pretty give or take, Amsterdam is the top 17 or 18 people with roll downs. But we are looking at the top 30 in terms of regular roll downs. So anyone in that top 30 block with these 2 times added together, you may or may not see a major. Then from those majors to qualify for the World Championships, there's a slight change in that the roll down used to go to 5, it now goes all the way down.
Yes, so basically, you'll always get 3 people qualify from every major. Yeah. So in theory, it's the top 3, but if any of those top 3 have qualified, it will roll down to the next place person.
And the best example to look at is, of course, the women's field, where Lauren Weeks and Megan Jacoby pretty much finish in 1 and 2 every single major. So by the time we get to the second round, then we're looking at 3, 4, and 5 taking those spots. Yeah. And then we've got the last chance qualifier, which has changed slightly in that there is only one of them. It's going to be in Barcelona. And in that last chance qualifier, the remaining spots will be awarded, and it will be the podium.
Yeah. Well done.
Boom. We're looking good for next week, folks.
And I should just say that there's going to be 4 major races. So there's Amsterdam, Hong Kong, Vegas and Glasgow.
It's not a bad run. It's like Amsterdam, Hong Kong, Vegas, Glasgow.
And then, so that's the 4 major races. 12 people qualify from them, and then 3 in Barcelona at the last chance qualifier to race at the World Championships.
Yeah,
in Chicago.
And what I really like, just a slightly new dynamic with that last chance qualifier, is that for roll downs when it comes to World Championships and injuries. So obviously last year we had 2 last minute injuries in Tim Vienish and Lucas Storath, and it just happened to be whoever was at World Championships who was part of the Elite 15 category stepped up to fill those gaps. But now those 2 will come from that last chance qualifier, 4th and 5th, which suddenly means you've got a chance, which I really like. And it adds a little bit more clarity as to what we do when those things crop up at key moments of the season.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it should be like a great race as well. I know there's so many athletes that really want to get in this elite field this year, and getting into these majors is hard because you need the average time, and there's all these auto qualifiers, but that Barcelona race
it will be
even more important.
I mean, it was great when we went to Cologne and FIBO last year to watch and broadcast the European one, because that felt pretty stacked. That's the problem when you've got 30 athletes who rotate through some of the majors, you kind of begin to know their strengths and weaknesses, and it gives you a really good overview of how stacked this field is.
Yeah. So if we talk about the fields, and you mentioned Megan, Lauren on the women's side, how do you see that playing out this year? Do you think it's going to be between those two still this year? Or?
I'm not even going to predict how it plays out, because I think that probably does disservice to my knowledge of where the athletes are at the moment in terms of their off-season training. But I mean, those two are easily the two that you look at based off the last couple of years of HYROX. However, I think we saw a lot of athletes step up last year, and if the off-season training's going well, then I think we could see a lot and expect a lot more from them this year. And Linda Meyer and Viola Oberlander are the two at the top of that list for me at the moment. Yeah. I think Viola at the World Championship sort of put her name into that into that conversation. I mean, I'll add a couple of names like Joanna Wheatrick. Yes.
I think I'm pronouncing that right. I need to get that before Amsterdam. But I think what she's done in the Australian races so far this season.
And young.
She's young. Yeah, not really like. She is one really that has come into it and hadn't trained a huge amount for it in advance, but like has been able to put in some. I think she's the 4th fastest woman ever. And so, like, with more specific training, with more time, with more experience, it would be interesting to see what she can do for sure. Yeah.
And you've got the consistency as well of Vivian Tafuto, Camila Massa very much on the bubble, and then almost like the success of our Brits as well in Jade Skillen and Zara Piergiani. Jade got the nod for one major last year, or the last chance qualifier last year?
For Washington, but I don't think she went.
So like, and now with her combined times, which kind of takes away that one good race aspect. Because everyone can have one good race on a good track that runs fast. It kind of almost removes the argument against that somewhat. So I'm excited to see how she might perform over with a bit more consistency at that elite level. And I feel like people like Kate Davey and Zara Piergiani are just getting better and better and better.
Yeah, Kate, I should say, she became the fastest British woman last weekend in Stuttgart with her time of like 1:02. So she's really in contention for one of those top 3 spots, I think, in Amsterdam as well.
Yeah. So I know that obviously you were very involved with kind of Kate's early development in the sport, but like whatever she's got going with Lauren Weeks and Anthony Persini it's kind of changed her trajectory, like unbelievably so.
It does feel like we've mentioned a lot of names there already, haven't we?
Take them all. That is all the 15.
It does feel like that women's field this year. Previously, the conversation has often just been like about Lauren and Megan, but it feels like there's certainly some names that can push themselves into that top 3.
And we haven't even talked about like Michaela Norman, who has major like wins under her belt. Anyway.
Yeah, and there's probably
it's going to be exactly the same as our pre-show. It's like, name 3 athletes you'd like to talk about. Here's 15.
You're nudging me to stop talking because I'm naming too many athletes. How about on the men's side? Like we saw probably one of the best races that we've seen on the men's side in the elites at Nice. I think
it was wild. It was so good.
What are your thoughts there?
It's very easy for us to go look at that podium, because the podium wasn't necessarily what we expected or predicted, and say, oh, that's going to be our 24, 25 kind of ones to watch. And like, no doubt they are, but at the same time, again, we have no idea what everyone's been up to in this off season and what their focus has been. And so I do think people like James Kelly, who has had a very kind of steady trajectory in terms of improvement in results, is only going to continue that curve. I think you're going to see a massive I'm not going to say the word comeback's not quite the right word, but reaction from Hunter McIntyre after what happened at Worlds, where he kind of didn't live up to his own expectations. I've noticed that on the current list of entries, which no doubt is subject to change, we haven't seen Rylan Shadegg since the first round in Chicago, where he pretty much blitzed the field and blew all of our minds. Like, how fit is Rylan now? Because if he's in the mix over the course of an entire year, I feel like the men's conversation suddenly becomes very different. And then Alex Ronchevich. I went through most of my current 2.5-year HYROX career thinking that Alex was slightly introverted Austrian lad who was really quiet and just came and ran his races, was Mr. Consistent. And then like last year happened and actually he's not, he's this larger than life, proper bubbly, like confident character. I mean, if you'd seen him at the after party, you would have understood. And I think that this win almost has given him like every building block that was required. He's already got the work. He's an absolute workhorse, but now he's got the confidence of winning a world championship. So I think this is just like the start of how good he is going to be in the next couple of years.
Yeah. It'd be interesting with Alex, whether it, you know, some athletes chase that win for years and years and years, and he's been doing that. Like, is that then going to fuel him?
What happens when you win?
Yeah. What happens when you win? Yeah. So and whereas like Hunter's like coming from the other place where he's like more fueled for it maybe. So that's definitely interesting. And then Sandy, obviously, who came so close in Nice, like that's must have given him the confidence that he wants to like make the jumps.
Sandy, and then your North American champion in Dylan Scott. Like, it's going to be interesting to see how he performs because he was pretty quiet, shall we say, at the start of the season, and then midway through suddenly was one of the men to watch. And then Ryan Kent, who was almost the total opposite, but as we understand now, due to personal circumstances. But I think we'll see. I think we'll see a lot from Ryan this season in terms of he understood that arguably potentially what he lost last year when things weren't going the way he wanted, and I think that will only drive him this season.
Any other sort of newer names that you're excited to see, or?
I think the biggest talking point, and of course in our pre-production meeting, we will talk about it, is Jake Dearden. I think that is the story. I'm not going to say target on his back, but probably a target on his back. You know, he's coming in wearing a Red Bull hat. He's the first athlete in our space to be offered a Red Bull deal. That is a huge deal, not just for us, but for him. And he did that without being in the Elite 15, which is quite a lot of pressure to put on a young lad. He won doubles in his age group last year. He's been obviously a regular winner of like kind of the racing that happens year round outside of the elites. And now he's finally made that step. And can he live up to the hype? I can't believe that just came out of my mouth. I'm so sorry, Jake. Can he live up to the hype?
It's a good question. It's a good point, but I think he is at the moment. You know,
what, do you see that marathon time he put on Instagram the other day?
Yeah.
Jeez.
2:28 in Berlin. Yeah,
wild.
Which is crazy. And that was 1 week after winning in Cape Town. You know, where he done 56 something. So even like those 2 times alone in that week with all that travel. And he's not necessarily trained specifically for a marathon or specifically for HYROX during that time, and he's been able to do those times. Yeah, I'm excited to see what he can do. Yeah,
I think that's going to be a really cat amongst the pigeons.
Yeah,
because you know the field talk about him.
Yeah, like, yeah.
So like, I want him to almost like go in and be like, yeah, I belong. Yeah. Like, this is where I'm going to be.
Yeah. And you mentioned like Jake was the winner of the doubles last season, and we're going to see elite doubles as well this year.
That fills me full so much excitement. Like, because hopefully we'll be able to broadcast it at World Champs. With, you would hope, the view in future years for us to broadcast it properly. Doubles in general, different dynamic, way more interval based, so much faster. But you get to see this team dynamic, which we got a chance to play with at that relay in World Championships last year. But it changes everything. Yeah. Like, what happens when you're severely under fatigued, you're both 2 prime athletes, and you're both fighting for every single second, and you're kind of conversing with each other, and it's like, I love team sport. It's so interesting.
Yeah. The relay was awesome at these. Everyone loved watching that, and I think the doubles is going to be similar. It
will give a little bit of that, and then we get all the excitement of discussing the pairings, how they complement each other. You know, people can. You have a pair, and that's the pair that will go to, if you qualify, will go to World Champs, but you can strike that time and pick another pair if you think it will serve you better. That, for a broadcaster's perspective, what wonderful drama. Like, that sounds great.
Yeah. You do have to, I should say though, I think you have to say before you qualify with another partner,
yes,
you have to strike that, that other one out, already,
But everything about that I think is HYROX taking like leaps and bounds in the right direction for entertainment. like as much as this is a sport, when you put it on television, it needs to be entertaining.
Mm-hmm. The other interesting dynamic with the doubles will be, and we're waiting for the schedule from the World Championships to be announced, but like, are some people going to come out and say we're going to focus on doubles, and so we're not going to compromise our doubles race by racing in the elites on the Friday night or whenever it is, which we saw a little bit of in the relay actually. Some people like didn't race in the solo because they wanted to focus on the relay. So whether any of that happens or not,
I mean, you would like to think that eventually it brings out a more specialist doubles like competition and field, and with the indies going, oh, I'll dip my toe in it.
Yeah.
I mean, that is like the dream, right? Like, and there is actually quite a lot of high profile people who run doubles. Hogan's probably being a good example.
Yeah. And even some, like I've had Joe Skipper from the Ironman world on this podcast, like very good runner and didn't necessarily do as well on the stations, but that becomes a little bit less important in the doubles. And so will you get other people from like outside the world of HYROX that can come in and team up and do a doubles and do very well? Be interesting to see, There's a few questions that I like to finish up on.
Okay.
The first one, what's been your best sporting experience is the question, or it can be like your presenting experience or sporting experience, whatever it is.
Oh, it's always going to be presenting, because that's pretty much my life now. I don't get to travel the world on my sporting expertise. There's a couple. Oh, I wish you should have given me this in advance.
Sorry.
One is Mont Saint Anne, Downhill Mountain Bike World Cup. Finn Isles wins on home soil. The background context is that the last Canadian to win on Canadian soil, Chainsaw, had passed away due to a biking accident, and he was kind of stepping up to fill his role model's shoes by winning in Canada. And it was already crowded, like it was a proper busy event, and everyone like piled into the finish area. I couldn't hear him, I was interviewing him, he couldn't hear me. Someone was pushing the backboard so it was falling over, so I'm interviewing him, holding up the backboard, trying to talk to him. And we've maybe got a meter squared space where the crowd's like leaning in and yelling stuff. Like it was just one of those unbelievable experiences. Similarly, Leger World Championships, tricolour podium in the men's downhill. And there was like a track, what do you call it when all the crowd ran onto the pitch invasion, a track invasion. And there are flares everywhere, hundreds of thousands of people like coming into what's meant to be a clean athlete only space, and they all push down all the barriers. Horribly dangerous. But what atmosphere? All the riders get lifted, the bikes get lifted, everyone's in the air being thrown around by fans. Like those kind of moments are insane. But that's because downhill mountain biking is insane. I think we had a real goosebumps moment doing World Champs this year, where you looked around the stadium and we thought it was going to be dead empty with no one in there because all the athletes hadn't entered the building yet, and it wasn't. It was rammed. And I've never been more stressed than that men's race, when it was Sandy Hunter and Alex like going back and forth. That was like my heart rate was through the roof through that. Jeez. And CrossFit Games always provides moments. Obviously, this year's CrossFit Games is absolutely horrendous with the death of Lazar. And we continued to broadcast, but in the small moments of that, there were times where the entire stadium was silent because one of the athletes had chosen that now we're going to do a minute silence. And it kind of stopped. Like the way I approached that with the athletes when I was broadcasting with ESPN was I would go up to them before and I'd be like, do you even want to interview? Number one. Number two, what do you want to interview about? Like they had the choice to do and say whatever they wanted in that moment. And Matilda, who I know quite well, had gone, actually, I don't want to interview, but I would like to say something. I was like, I'll introduce you and I'm just going to hand you the microphone. And then she led this minute silence of everyone in the stadium where all of the athletes on the floor got together. We all held hands and we just stood for a minute and, thought about Lazar and everything that had happened. And that was one of those moments where, God, I wish it never happened. But at the same time, I'm almost, there were those moments where I was glad that me, outside of everyone else, was in that position to allow the space for the athletes to do what they did and to process it in their own way, if that makes sense. I feel like perhaps if it had been an American reporter or someone who maybe didn't know Lazar as well, as I kind of did, maybe wouldn't have given the same amount of space and respect for the athletes to be able to. And I feel that was probably one of the most important moments.
Yeah.
Even though the only thing I wanted to do was go home and cry for days.
Yeah. You help like facilitate it. If it's like,
So yeah, that was a really kind of big career, like something that really stands out as one of the kind of moments, which is almost totally the opposite of the other moments.
Yeah. I was going to ask you what your toughest sporting experience is.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievably. So my toughest life experience. There is nothing that prepares you to watch, your friend basically die and then have to continue to broadcast for 4 days afterwards. Yeah. Like it was horrendous. I was really lucky that our team around me was like amazing. They hugged me when I was crying in the corner. They pulled me up. They got me through it. And even that first piece to camera I did, where I didn't do. I got halfway through and burst into tears. But like even that, I had you wouldn't have known, but I had like 8 people around the camera like there with me, and that was like, I don't know, just the support was pretty amazing.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And then last question is, if you could just plant one idea or piece of advice in the mind of everyone listening.
Oh my God, give me that in advance.
It could be anything. Yeah. Sorry. What would it be?
Geez. Probably. If you've got a dream, if you've got ambition, if you've got a goal, never give up on it. The people who succeed are the people who don't give up. And off the back of everything we learned at the CrossFit Games this year, live every day like it's your last day, and tell everyone that you love them and enjoy living this wonderful thing we call life.
Love it. Awesome. All right. This has been amazing. Thank you.
I can't believe you took me 2 years. It took 2 years to ask me to do this.
Sorry.
I thought we were friends.
Where should people go if they want to follow you, find out more about you?
Come join me on Instagram at @ls_sports, or that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I have LinkedIn, but it feels a little bit formal for the current circumstances.
You got a website?
I do have a website, but you're not interacting with me. You'll just see my show reel.
Okay.
If you want to hire me, please go to my website, www.laurensarahsmith.com.
All right, awesome. Anything else you want to talk about before we go?
Oh no, I'm just super excited about the season starting. Cannot wait for Amsterdam. I think Hong Kong will be a little bit warm. We've got an incredible season ahead, and I just think the HYROX gang, the HQ lot, whilst they're kind of still finding their way, oh my God, the steps every year, it just gets better and better and more exciting. And I cannot wait to see where this goes.
Every race, really.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.